How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm glad you called.
Yeah, I was really glad to get that message from you, frankly. The message you gave me this morning made me think that none of it got through to you. And it was just like, I was just watching, I don't know, that doesn't really apply to me. And then your second message, we were like, oh my God, I can so relate. I was glad to hear. I was thinking maybe it was, falling on deaf ears, so to speak. But no, that second message you sent really lifted my spirits, honey. Thank you.
Oh, good. Well, it's a good first chapter. I'm looking forward to hearing more. I mean, there's a lot to think about there. I think the hard part that's hard for me is like, hang on a second. I gotta see if I got a turn. Sorry.
Yep, nope. Okay. Drive first, talk later.
I got it. Sorry. But, it's like, well, what is normal? So many different spectrums. And I know that autism tends to have more quirks and behaviors.
Well, it's a very good question. And it's very interesting how he posts this and I'm like 7 chapters into it now. And
oh, wow. Okay.
He actually poses this question. He does this whole thing about how when people who, you can go ahead and mute this. Let me monologue here for a second.
Okay.
Because you get real bad feedback here.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's all right. It happens. Especially in Michigan.
Okay, mute.
There you go. All right, so now I can tell that you're muted. So no, he actually makes several examples of how when people, particularly those who self-diagnose, try to break the news to their family, coworkers and friends, etc., that often they are met with what is interesting is, of course, like he said, he lists 5 or 6 examples of the way people initially kind of deny it, or they invalidate it, or they try to minimalize it. And one of the ways he says that is that they're like, well, and I'll never forget the first time that I heard it. Well, I think maybe everybody's a little bit autistic. And of course, I do kind of still have the open-mindedness to it, that idea that, as some have said, that all real creativity comes from our autistic part. And of course we can say that, well, where does merely mimicking genius end and true creativity begin? And that's a very, very tough line that I don't think we're ever going to be able to decide with science, but rather it'll be something that philosophy, ontology will discover and be able to make a case for it. But until then, we're still flying very blind here. But the thing that he uses as an analogy, and let me see if I can find the part. But he talks about how, and this is really cool. Just so you know, today one of the most amazing experiences I ever had as a scholar happened, where on one page of a kind of peripheral book, I'm really shocked at how this is almost miraculous how this book has fallen into my lap. But today, everything came together. My study on trauma and PTSD and nonviolent communication and mimesis, Christianity, as well as all of the psychological disorders, all came together in this book on autism today. And I just couldn't believe it. It's a good thing I was sitting down, because I did feel the lightning bolt. And out of it, I got I've actually got some new symbols from this book. As you know, that means a lot when there's I've actually can go ahead and say that I have a new symbol coming out as an autistic adult. He's adding his conclusion right in the title, which is that no, ultimately, cut right to the short end of it, is that he believes that roughly, and he does believe that we are still in a period where people are terribly underdiagnosed. But he says, let's just say that 4% of people are truly neurodivergent. And he does a really good job of differentiating people who are neurodivergent with ADHD or ODD or PDA from people who are neurodivergent, who have autism, who may also have those things. And so this is very interesting that, since I've been away from the literature for 4 years, that, I have to kind of catch up. There have been some amazing discoveries. They've pushed back the horizon of our understanding. And one of the things that he talks about, let me get to the point, he says that that would kind of be like saying that everybody's on the dwarf scale. There's 400 kinds of dwarfism. I didn't know that until I read this today. And he says, yes. And he says that 96% of these dwarfs, for example, you can put in the center of the bell curve, okay? And everybody that falls outside of that, they don't have dwarfism, okay? That's just like saying, I'm 6'2", but I have latent dwarfism, okay? That may be a genetic thing that I could pass on, but it is not affecting me, obviously, okay? I am not in any way a dwarf. So the point he makes is that, sure, some people are shorter and taller than others, but to say that everybody's on the spectrum of height is as ridiculous as to say everybody is autistically. And this is the very important distinction that I need to make in my discussion about the autistic tree and how it branches out. It can branch into disorder, it can flourish into this, this wonderful flourishing of man at his peak potential. And one of the things that we need to make very, very clear here is that not only is it a disorder of the amygdala, but that it is primarily a theory of mind module issue. And he has, I'm like 150 pages into, he has not, and maybe not that far yet, he has not mentioned theory of mind yet, except almost kind of just tangentially. It's not like he did. There are some terms that he doesn't seem, and that's the thing, is that he may not have read all the books that I've read. So, and then on the other hand, he may have read a few of the books that I haven't read yet. And so he's maybe recycling ideas that I simply haven't encountered. And so it's all very exciting. And the other thing that's really interesting about this is, if you watch the video you caught where I was able to identify what his Christian attenuation is, right? That he's not Catholic because he doesn't automatically go, well, of course we're not going to be perfect. That's not the point. The point is to, rise, that every person is called to sainthood, to do all that we can to shed our sin and become saints. And so perfection is not possible on this side of eternity, but holiness is.
Right.
And so he goes on to make a whole bunch of other things that he has a very, it's interesting, one of the comments that my extended comments was that, okay, so he is, so social application, he finishes chapter 2 with this summing up. It says, if coming out as autistic as an adult is hard, it's only because of the resistance of those around you. It doesn't actually change the challenges you have in your job, your relationships, or your perception, which is just such a perfect fact because the challenges you've always faced haven't been due to the autism either. Not really. And I'm like, baloney. They've been he says that all of our problems, he doesn't quite come out and say it this way, but we can extrapolate this. He says that the challenges we've always faced, and I'm cutting two sentences together, have been due to the way the world has been structured based on neurotypical thinking and socialization. In most cases, autism is a social disability, not a medical one. And so these are huge stretches to make. But here's my comment, is that he's trying to blame, and we see this in autists. I mean, if you saw that documentary that I emphasized, I think it was Neurotypical, where the poor husband at the end is exasperated because now that she's aware of her diagnosis, she's making no effort to mask. And so she's become this kind of monstrous person over him. And he's even more desperate after the diagnosis than he was before. And so, so I'm very, very leery, as you know, of letting autism be merely this catch-all excuse for all of our bad behavior, okay? That is a surefire way to encourage people to keep making the kinds of mistakes that autists have in their history that they're constantly living in guilt and shame over. You know, there's so many things in my life where I'm like, oh my God, I cannot believe I did that. I wish I could take that back. What a stupid thing to say. Or, you know, one of the things that autists often do, especially the blabby ones like us, we don't understand why people are offended by things. You know, we're trying to be honest, blah blah blah. But of course, you know, people like me. Thank God I was a salesman for, you know, almost 20 years, right? Because then I learned how, you know, I learned my social skills. So this whole blaming society thing. Here's my comment that I wrote: this desire to blame society for all of our problems, externalizing blame, staking out our innocence. Abstracting particular interactions rather than seeing our role in them, and perhaps our bad, you know, our bad behavior in them, and and to see also our opportunity for improvement. To not do that is something that all unawakened people do, and even some awakened people still fall back into this. There's something inside every one of us that wants to externalize blame, just as we want to externalize the cost of our actions. And so this is kind of that, you know, just throwing your trash out the back door and hoping the river takes it out. Okay, this is, you know, I don't like how, you know, unawakened people are so quick to blame society for all of our problems. Oh, I'm a victim. You know, I'm a victim because I'm autistic. What's interesting is he continues to make the argument throughout this is that we're not victims. That in many ways we have, you know, some superior qualities, but we also have these deficiencies. I mean, he doesn't shy away from the deficiencies, but he's afraid to actually properly define it. He doesn't like labels. And so he's got this really woke spirit where he's out, and as a therapist, I can understand. You know, he's in the trenches. He's really dealing with people's shattered self-esteem. So he has this very therapeutic approach to it. But as we know, therapeutic alienation, or the therapeutic of alienation, in other words, alienation therapy. Oh, you know, I'm a woman, so I can blame all the men, or I'm black, so I can blame all the whites, or I'm autistic, so I can blame all the normies. This is the constant scapegoating of identity politics. That these victims, and many of them are victims, but of course this is the big problem going forward. Will always be being able to discern unscrupulous empathy, unscrupulous compassion, because so often people are compassionate merely because it makes them feel better about themselves. They really don't care about the person they're helping. They just really care about feeling better about themselves. And so in the name of good, a lot of terrible, particularly government programs have been done, but just think about the arbitrary handing out of just cash on the street to beggars. You know, we are encouraging them to stay on the street thereby instead of getting, and this is why, you know, I always say, I talk to them and, you know, hey, there's shelters. I've worked in these. I know there is a pipeline to get you back on your feet. Why aren't you in it? Yeah. And, you know, to help them at that low point is to push off metanoia. He needs, and that's the thing. However, you know, how we treat the least of these is how we treat our Lord. And so we can't just be, you know, indifferent. We can't when these things come into our life. So to finish merely, I said the whole thing about how alienation therapy is so typical amongst those who are enraptured with identity politics of whatever kind. But it's nevertheless, it's a reverse scapegoat. You know, we've been scapegoated, we've been victimized, so now we want to victimize someone else. It's our turn to scapegoat, damn it. And so that's often what we're really experiencing here. So, but I'm really excited because after I was cranking this out today, and my big exciting thing, I'd already had the autistic shelf ready to roll or I was starting to get it ready to roll, but I did finish organizing it. And it looks pretty cool, I must say. There are there's some great stories to tell. Now, did you watch the movie about Temple Grandin with me, with Claire Danes in it, or not? Were you there?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did.
The gal that helped the cows go calmly to their slaughter.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, that's right, because you want me to get you one of those cow squeezing machines, because that way you feel comfortable. And so no, it's kind of funny, of course, because, you know, I grew up in a cow town, and then, you know, was in Kansas all those years around all those feedlot guys, and so, you know, I know what that smells like, I know what that feels like, and what those poor cows, You know, that's a very tough thing. You know, I was reading a lot from Roger Scruton when he was talking about making sure that the road from the farm to our table is not one of destruction. And you know, I always thought, oh, those poor cows. Anyways, yeah, especially out there where the land, you know, what are you going to do? They're delicious. So thank you, Temple, for helping, you know, making their misery a little bit less. So anyway, so there's my monologue. I'm pretty excited. But what did you think, first of all, about the idea that, you know, really only 4% of us are neurotypical, and that's because, or excuse me, of the neurotypical, of all people, only 4% are autistic, even though there's a larger portion that is neurotypical.
Yeah, it's a smaller percentage than I would have thought.
But and it surely is higher, but I'm just saying, just from a distinction point, it's not a gray area. The point is that you have it or you don't. And this is this is the example. It's like dwarfism again, that, you know, I always make the example that if you put 5 toddlers in a room, even if they don't speak the same language, and give them some toys, within minutes they will have been able to communicate the silent language of human, right? But the autistic kid won't, and it won't take long for the other toddlers to recognize that this kid is not picking up the social cues, okay?
Yeah.
And so it is a matter of how quickly are our parents able to identify the disordered, let's call it what it is, the disorder of the theory of mind module, and the accompanying, you know, it may be that we are able to treat the amygdala override in a way that doesn't damage the creativity, but gives us better emotional regulation. If we can do a better job of regulating our emotions and I think a lot of it is just recognize it. And this is why I think, going back to Dietrich von Hildebrand and the idea of the affective sphere and all that we've learned about how emotions are different than our ratio, our rational thought. All of that gets really exciting now when we realize that with mimetic theory, that, you know, we're driven by our desires primarily. Our desires are secondhand, and we're not aware of it. So the whole world of the id, this secret layer of the human psyche, I'm like Bob Newhart all of a sudden, Porky Pig. Mimetic theory is now the kind of the pass key that opens the door into the id. Because let's face it, the id for until now has basically been that area of the psyche that we don't understand. You know, it has been a locked door, and just like instinct is a term that we use for that which we know not of. You know, what drives migratory birds south? Instinct. Well, what is instinct? What is to say that migratory birds fly south because of instinct is to say that we do not know what instinct is. They just somehow they do it. It is the unfelt impulse, or is the shared impulse, widely felt by a species. And so that whole idea that we don't necessarily know instinct any more than we now had previously known the id, and now we have the whole door to the id is wide open now. And particularly with Jean-Michel Wheeleron's, you know, grid of the healthy neuro and pathological grid overlaid against the role model, rival, and obstacle. And so everything is changing here. And it's just so exciting because this book is a 2025 book. One of the there may be only like 2 other books from this year in the whole house, right? But this one suddenly shows up and I'm like, oh, this looks good. I don't even remember buying it. I know I've always been kind of peeking around, you know, and there were a couple books that I almost bought, and I just started reading the reviews, and I looked them up on Goodreads, and I'm like, oh, this is enough. I did buy one book that was AI written, and I feel hoodwinked. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I fell for it. But it was just so slickly packaged and it had all the buzzwords, right? So I'm like, oh, but it certainly made me aware of something that I always thought about, which was that many readers like me, after they go to the table of contents, immediately go to the index to see if the topics that matter to that issue are being discussed. And so I'm always looking for, consciousness, metanoia, and then looking up the names of the guys that I think are authorities on whatever topic it is. And so I now realize that that's kind of what AI is doing, is that they are filtering real libraries to kind of aggregate all of this knowledge. And it's an exciting thing, don't get me wrong. And it's kind of scary, because I would never have thought scholars would ever be, replaced by computers. But we're getting close, and so we're gonna have to be better scholars, I think, is what that means.
Things now, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Well, just like I make a comment about, I'm glad that book that you're 7 chapters in, sounds like it's really good. So
Yeah.
We're doing more. That not because everyone that's short doesn't have dwarfism either. You know, that's the whole thing.
Sure.
You know, because we said, all the different kinds of dwarfism, which 400, whatever, I'm shocked.
Yeah, but are there any people that are under 4 feet that aren't some form of dwarfism? I mean, I don't know the answer to that. But it could just be that, my grandmother was pretty short, but I think she just kept getting shorter and shorter as the years went on, too.
Yeah, that happens. I'm shorter, too. Yeah, it does. It does. So.
Yeah, so here's the new sign. I'm showing this for the camera here. It's 90s. It looks cool because it's like the 90. You remember the old 76 Spirit 76 logo that had the stars around it, and it kind of had that fancy script on it that looked like. So instead of 76, apostrophe 76, think of 96 with the percentage sign scrolled in behind it, and then 4 stars surrounding it, to make the point that 96% of people are not autistic, but there are 4% of us that are, and it's important to also point out that he makes this thing that there is a greater diversity amongst autists than there are, and he doesn't use the word autist, by the way. I think that's very interesting. I figured that would have been the term that would have emerged, but I'm sticking with it because I like that fact that it is close to artist. And it's easier. It's just an easier word to say that instead of autistics, it seems to me. Autistics just, now we're getting into the world of statistics, and I don't want to feel like a number. And that's the whole point, is he makes this point that the 4%, the 4 stars that are outside of the norm, there's a far greater diversity amongst autists than there are amongst normies. So, so now what are we talking about? We're talking about my book, The Rise of the Savage. We're talking about the undifferentiated masked man is always going to be there, apparently. Doesn't that explain it? Didn't I just back myself right back into that vertical invasion of the masses about which Ortega discusses, that they haven't been acclimated, they haven't been inundated, they haven't been steeped in Western tradition, but rather they just kind of showed up on the historical scene. We needed people to do work because we had all these jobs available, and the next thing you know, everybody's, living in Allen Park and not going to church and beating their wives and kids and drinking and driving cars and driving up to their cottage every weekend 4 hours each way. That's the masked man, right? And so what in the world are we going to do with that before?
Masked man, for sure.
Yeah.
And the city's still ugly, by the way.
Oh yeah, where are you now, by the way?
I'm almost at Darrin.
Oh, so you're out of Livonia then. Okay, all right.
Don't want to give this whole book away. I want to sell a bunch of copies of it. I think it's a very worthy book, although it's a lot of fun too, because there is a lot with which I disagree. And I'll just point it out as we go along. So chapter 2 is We Are Not All on the Spectrum, Coming Out as an Autistic Adult. When I realized I was autistic, I didn't keep it a secret. And ever since then, people have asked me, is it difficult to come out as an autistic adult? This is such a mystifying question to me. What are we comparing the experience to? It's a lot harder living and working for decades, watching a pattern of near success send you crashing back down on the rocks over and over again. Most autistic people I know have experienced many excruciating job changes, being fired, asked to resign, pushed out, alienated, and moved on to new lives without having built very much in their previous positions. Each episode of this experience has a different cause. A client of mine who worked in computer programming put it really well. At one job, it was obvious my boss went south on me after I disagreed with him on a project. I wasn't wrong, and the whole office knew, which I found so confusing. The company could have saved a lot of trouble by not going with his project. And they would have saved even more money by not firing me. So even the bottom line didn't save me. At another job, it was after a 6-month performance review. There wasn't a problem with the job I was doing, according to him, but how well I was meshing with the team. This kind of thing happened at 5 jobs in my 30s with no common link to explain it until I realized I was autistic. In this case, the realization was a huge relief. Coming out had its alienating moments, but at least he knew his work history wasn't something to be ashamed of. After spending a bit of time reviewing all his past employment struggles, he was able to connect the dots that seemed completely unrelated, and understand how social issues, problems with hierarchy, unwillingness to compromise his ideals, and a black and white sense of justice all played parts in his job losses. They were also traits of being autistic. Of course, this knowledge didn't get any of his jobs back, but it made him feel less like a failure and more like someone who performed well but was frequently misunderstood. And that's my sprinkler system running me off here. Shoot, I think I'm going to shut that down. This is too nice of a sunset to that. The awareness that so many of our problems are autism related give us a sense of relief. Because in some ways it'll make us feel less like a failure and more like someone who performed well but was just merely and frequently misunderstood. As for being difficult, it's more like the simple mechanics of a rope and pulley system. The amount of work is the same, but the pure strength required to live your life can be eased as long as you can maintain some support and control, which is the part of the reason for this book. We can be easily overlooked about coming out as autistic when you're an adult, as you already were, always would be autistic. It didn't matter whether you just described it in that way, so far as the condition goes. However, naming the thing gives you access to a toolkit you didn't have before. Hold on, I think I get it. I realized the initial question, is it difficult to come out as an autistic adult? Doesn't mean what I thought it meant. They're asking if this is a social challenge. It really took me years to understand what that question meant. They were just looking at one domain of my life that isn't important to me, and it's no more of a social challenge than I've ever had. Maybe I'm supposed to be embarrassed, but again, I don't do embarrassment. So no, it wasn't hard. Next question, please. And then I wrote in the margin here that this is probably an autist that Simon Baron Cohen would describe as nearing the pole of 0 degrees of empathy. Very rationalistic, very male pattern systemizing brain, and high in that upper left quadrant. And so not only does he not feel empathy, he doesn't have time for it either. But you'll see that he has developed this as a skill to his work, and he's also developed it into a political weapon, as you'll see as well. Nonetheless, there's these moments that slip out when we really get to see behind his masking, and I think this is one of those moments. So moving on to the next subchapter here, I want to make a quick note on terms. I want to make something clear. I'm autistic. I don't have autism. It's the same as the fact that I'm bald and don't have baldness. When I was younger, I was bald, but I didn't know I was bald until I matured and came to a better awareness of who I was. As my genetics expressed themselves more clearly, baldness was a quality I displayed because I'm bald. Conversely, I have 2 arms and 2 legs. These things can be modified, just like having a cold and flu can be modified. Having autism cannot be modified. It's important to me that I say I'm autistic and not I have autism, because I don't even know what that would mean. It would be like saying I have human. It makes more sense to say I have a body, because at least I'll be cured of that at some point. Parenthetically, he writes, I suppose my autism could be remedied at the same time, but that's not certain, and really not for me to say. This is turning out very beautifully, isn't it? So there's a really nice note there of humility and perhaps a oblique nod to the Creator. But it's also essential to note that autism is a description of who I am and who other autistics are, and not at all an affliction that haunts us. Oh, yes it is, sir. Yes it is. Some people can deduce that I'm autistic, while others cannot. But most people who know me, given time and education, will see patterns in my life that are better described by autism than by anything else. Autistic people who are aware they're autistic can almost always tell that I'm autistic. There are some autistics who don't agree with some of the above information, taking issue with whether they have autism or are autistic. There are even more family members of autistic people who insist that autistics are, quote, people first, and assert that such individuals have autism. I've had a lot of people even tell me after I've said I'm autistic that they don't refer to it in that way. It's at this point that I imagine placing autism gently on the floor and bonding with them by watching a sports show together. I'm autistic is an example of an identity first language, and I think it's important. One of my friends tells me that it started with the deaf community, and that checks out. Neurodivergence, that is, people who have neurodivergency. Neurodivergents need to learn a lot from other minority groups, especially the Pride movement. There is a condescending attitude that some people or institutions have towards the LGBTQIA plus folks that can be summed up as, I like you even though I don't approve of the things you do, or more succinctly, hate the sin, love the sinner, both of which have been identified as insulting by the people who hand out marching orders and who then marked down to be scapegoated. That's what cancel culture is all about. It's been identified, to say it is a thought crime. Okay? To say hate the sin, love a sinner is now a thought crime, is basically what he's saying here. Pride tells us, quote, my sexuality and or sexual identity is not a set of behaviors that I present for your toleration. Wow. There's a whole lot to be unpacked there. This is an aspect of who I am, and I'm proud of these qualities. I'm not seeking therapy or help to rid me of them. I'm not hiding them. I'm not sitting quietly while other people feel they can be themselves because of someone's judgment. I'm me, I'm proud. I think that's lovely, which is why I say I am autistic. Ugh, there's a lot to unpack here. This is not probably the place to do it. What is interesting is the very next paragraph is brilliant. And so I wrote that he makes very, very solid points here, but they're in the service of a malady rather than like with autism, which is a God-given cross and which comes with a superpower. Yeah, I mean, just because someone is proud of their sexual addiction doesn't make it any less a sin or any less of an addiction. And what's also interesting is that he's opened the door to the gate theory of homosexuality on a further page, 41. He makes the point that sexuality is not deterministic, and so then there has to be another theory. And this is the thing. He's opened the door to a lot of the work that I have done. And it just may be, like I was telling Lisa earlier, that it may be that he's read 4 of the books that I haven't read, and maybe it's that I've read 4 of the books he hasn't read yet, and we just haven't come to terms. And so it's just very exciting, because I do sense that this is a person that is largely in the business of therapeutic alienation, primarily because he wants to help victims. And this is where we're going to head to this at some point, but it's a lot further back in the book, where he connects it back to trauma, and that ends up becoming really important. So let me give you this follow-up paragraph to what I thought was a tremendous disaster in the preceding paragraph. He says he brings up all of this because I don't want to deal with it anymore. It should probably be noted that I refer to someone however they tell me to refer to them, no matter how it jibes with my own self-reference. Everyone is welcome to have their own beliefs. but it won't change the fact that autism isn't an affliction, or that curing autism is anything but a form of brain damage or eugenics. But I'm not your dad, and you're welcome to believe the things that go against the truth without my permission. And while we're on the subject of belief, I have people reach out to me every day who think I'm suspicious of them because they don't have an official diagnosis. I promise them that if they say they've put in the work and they believe they're autistic, I'll believe them. Being diagnosed. There are three paths to a diagnosis. Wow, look at this guy. The first being called out when you're young by a parent or teacher, taken to a doctor, evaluated, and boom. This is common for autistics with high support needs, whether due to learning or behavioral issues that make daily life very difficult. For many reasons, most of those caught early are male and white. Yeah, it's a privilege thing, he writes. And I'm like, no, fool. It's an empathy and sociability thing that girls inherently have naturally in greater quantity and quality than boys do. So boys, in other words, aren't capable of masking their autism the way that girls do, because girls learn those social signals. They realize how important they are because, you know, boys compete with one another, girls form up groups and empathize with one another. So they inherently develop these social skills based on their DNA, okay? This is not social structure. So again, we've encountered another point of disagreement here, and he's obviously taking the woke side of it, which feels good, but it's ridiculous. And what's interesting is the moment that Asperger's was translated into English, it wasn't 2 years later that, you know, the women autists were coming forward with the term Aspergirls and saying, oh, we're being unfairly diagnosed and looked over and la. And of course, you know, just like everything else, that because they scream the loudest, an entire therapeutic was set up to minister to their self-esteem and their sense of victimhood. And so a therapeutic, the alienation therapeutic was set up to tell all the Aspergirls that, you know, they've been victims of society, and that, you know, the way to change all of that was to be a bunch of strident jackasses and blame everybody else rather than, you know, actually working on themselves. Now, autism does not exempt you from the duty of rising. We are all called to sainthood. We are all supposed to shed our sin. And it's tough. It's a bitch. And that's the point. The person that's actually trying to become a better man is acutely aware of how much evil remains in him, of what sin he just can't seem to get rid of. Whereas the man who's, you know, pretty happy with the way he is, who's proud of his sin, perhaps even, you know, that guy has no clue of how much evil is really happening in his heart and in his actions. So, a little morality digression there. But self-diagnosis is what a lot of late identified autistics are going through. This is the second path of diagnosis, a self-diagnosis. And it's what a lot of late identified autistics are going through. And I'll also point out that he says autistics. I just chop that down to autists. I think it's a more artful term, and autistics sounds like statistics. So I'd rather have it sound like artist than statistics. And so I don't know, I'm not going to change it, but I can. When I say it, people might say, "Oh, I like the way you do that," and therefore it may catch. We'll see. Always looking to be a crowd crystal if possible. So, self-diagnosis. There are online tests you can take and a lot of self-education you can undergo. There's misinformation out there too. Lots of folks are afraid we have an autistic agenda. Yes, we do. And many people do. This Devon Price on coming out is just, it's just crazy how quickly the wokesters have seized upon it, you know, and it's just one more institution through which they are going to do their long march, embed themselves, ensconce themselves, entrench themselves, and then run everybody else out until they have total control, and then they can be strident jackasses with impunity. However, there is misinformation too, and lots of folks are afraid that we have an autistic agenda where we recruit folks to believe that they're autistic on TikTok in order to do something nefarious, I assume. So he thinks that basically that people with the autistic agenda are trying to recruit people to incorrectly believe that they are autistic when they're not. I don't know if that's happening. The motive isn't clear to me yet because I have not been let in on the conspiracy. Oh no, you just explained it, you outlined it, you blueprinted it. Okay, we're supposed to use the crybaby identity politics model. So he's already part. He's not, maybe not officially a part of it, but he is aligned with it already. And this is, for example, how the press is all liberal. They don't take marching orders. It's just that they look at it the same way and they want to fall in line with it, and they don't even realize that they are being a part of the conspiracy. They've fallen prey to the second reality. They've become the useful idiot. They're merely pawns of propaganda. They don't realize that it is their mimetic desire that they are imitating of their role models of some kind. So anyways, he says he hasn't been let in on the conspiracy, and then he asterisks to say, to be fair, there could be an autistic agenda conspiracy, but if so, it goes so deep that I am entirely unaware of it. This conspiracy is so powerful that I have been brought under its sway and made into a tool of it without ever knowing. Yeah, then he's a useful idiot then. While this could be possible, I would really like to assume that there would be some tangible results from the scheme, like a policy change or better employment numbers or broad social change or improved rates of loneliness. But none of these things is evident. Sadly, considering the evidence, I'm forced to conclude that I'm not part of a conspiracy. So, you can't expect psychiatrists or doctors or engineers to understand social movements or politics or the political process. So I'm going to give him this huge pass here, and just hope that eventually he becomes a fan and learns this stuff the way that I did, from far wiser men than myself. So the central thing is that going back to him here. The central thing is there's a lot of good information available, and boy is there. And most self-diagnosed autists I know have read a few books and taken some tests. Also, they know their experience better than anyone else. You have to be pretty sure your life experience makes more sense through the lens of autism than without it before you start telling people. No one does this half convinced. And boy, he sure got that right. I know that when I finally started reading thoroughly the Simon Baron Cohen books and many of the others that I'll talk about in my fuller speech, but every page had answers to some of my life's most perplexing and persistent, perpetual problems. And boy, it was, for me, however, it was a tremendous relief. It was a liberation. And I always want to point out, and I'm sure I will forget to, that when we're talking about autism, that I don't know what the ratio is, but not everybody gets the diagnosis with this huge sense of liberating relief like it came to me. Many people, it's like a death sentence. It is, it's like narcissistic injury to their souls. They can't deal with the fact that they now realize they've been wearing masks. They've been pretending to be normal this whole time. And that doesn't mean, just because they're wearing masks, and this is where I think my study on alterity will come in and be so helpful, that just because we have masks doesn't mean that those are phony. It may mean that is how we are a good social chameleons in a way that is meeting people where they are at. Boy, if everybody were to do that for us, boy, we would feel a lot more at home in the world. And so I think we need to give ourselves a little bit of a break on that to some degree, because you know I can be a major hard ass, and you know one moment, you know, if I'm in a dive bar, some country gun and knife club, you know, where we're playing Roadhouse Blues, and you know I'm playing behind chicken wire, I can be a badass, but you know, I usually suffer the problem that my Christian meekness is mistaken for weakness. And of course, you know, some people, when you're nice to some mean people, they get meaner. Some people you're nice to them, and of course they feel shamed, and you know they become nice to you. But to some people, some mean people, they see your kindness as weakness and as an opportunity. It's almost a provocation to some people. To, you know, what's the old line that if you let some people slide, they end up ice skating all over your ass? Well, this is the thing, is, you know, how do you exhibit Christian meekness without it being weakness? Well, sometimes it's just going to happen. And that's when they got to learn that you're also wise as serpents, even though you're gentle as doves. So anyways, I think that's probably a really good point to end on tonight. Plus, a little dark, so anyways, I can't recommend it enough, but come to me and I will tell you all the parts you got wrong. Anyhow, take care of y'all.